Welcome, everybody, to our 138th webinar of this special series. It's at some point we're going to have to stop that, right? It's 138 of them. Number one, it's an amazing number. A lot of people have put a lot of hard work into these, and it's and so much information. But 138 of them. We're in the early part of our third year of doing these. This is the 15th of 2022. So all great information with Race Studio 3 becoming a production piece of software. We're inside of a mini little series that we're doing where we're going through every single function of Race Studio analysis. The way you might look at your data today is the scatter plot. And while we have shown little bits of pieces of how to use it and some examples, we're going to do a deep dive in just that and talk about that today. And if you're watching this one on YouTube later, down in the description box, you will have links to all the other functions. So, and every one of these 8 or 10 in a row of just the straight functionality of Race Studio 3 analysis, once we've gone to production, will all have links to each other in the description box, so you can watch these and learn specific functionality. Also, I've been working hard in putting the chapters in them. So when you do open one up, this one it takes me a day or two to do that usually. But when you look back at these, you can hover your mouse down over the timeline, and you can actually maybe find the specific topic inside the scatter plot that you're looking for a little bit quicker. So, but let's get started on this one. I appreciate our co-host today is Matt Romanowski, has been working with us for quite a while on the beta testing, and so we brought him, and James Coburn has been one that has been helping us quite a bit. Next week will be Emiliano, the programmer, will be here with the tracks function. But appreciate Matt and James coming on here and working with us. They've got just a ton of experience in the new Race Studio 3 software, so appreciate him being here. Matt is a longtime motorsports guy, races a Porsche 914, and is a name dealer, and so he does all sorts of support for folks. He's out there he's online, at the track, on the phone, and at the track working as a professional data guy as well. So he's a pretty cool stuff. Many time host of our webinars. Thank you very much, Matt, for joining us again.
Oh, no problem. Thanks for having me. These are a ton of fun. We got a good group, and it's always nice to have. It helps me a lot because when I have to put out the information, it solidifies how I understand it, and it's really fun helping everybody else dig into their data.
It is. I've always said, and it's always been true, that boy, trying to learn enough to be able to pass along information and teach others, you learn everything at such a deeper level, and it's like drinking out of a fire hose, right? Trying to get up to speed and get everything. So you learning more about this is beneficial to everybody else that you work with, and me as well. So appreciate you being here, though. It's a very important cause, and helping a lot of people. So I really do appreciate it. The let's talk a little bit about the what it looks like when you go in there. You've got a toolbar in Race Studio 3, and we'll see this in a moment. And all of these are starting off with this slide where we go in and show you what the icon looks like for the scatter plot. This is one of those that people call it different things, right? In fact, even the icon shows an XY, because it really is an XY graph as well, but we call it a scatter plot, and there are some other things that people will call it as well. But there's the icon to get into it, amongst the line of all the other icons that are available to you when you first open up Race Studio 3. And then once you get into it, there's another series of icons, and this is where we'll kind of we'll chat just a minute about here, but then we will jump in, pretty quickly. I've got a few more slides just to kind of show you some things, but then we're going to jump into live data fairly quickly. So once you get in there is some other icons. Some of these match what you've already seen in other functions that you're using. You have lines and you have dots. When you're looking at data in an XY plot, you've got both of those, and we've got these same two icons that we see in so many other functions. You can change the line width and the dot size right from a button. where in the past you've always had to open up some sort of a setting. So that's very helpful to have those right there. You can also choose the colors of some of them. You can choose the channel across the x-axis across the bottom by clicking on a button. And then, of course, you have the ability to add laps and show your best lap, your best 3, your best 5. Show all laps very quickly under a laps button. There are other ways to add laps, but again, the software's folks have been pretty good about giving us the stuff that you really need as some icons right up there up front. And every one of our functions has a little wrench in the upper right-hand corner, and that is the plot settings. And that'll be the settings you can open up there, and you can see not only the functions and settings for the scatter plot, but it also has some tabs. If you open it up from that area, it also has tabs for any other function you have open at the same time. So that'll be a button that we'll look at in some of the live data as well. The Matt put together a few slides and sent them over to me, and this presentation is available. I think Robbie's already linked it in the live chat right here. If you're watching this on YouTube later, we're going to talk about some different things that we're going to chat. So I'm sorry, but the link into the chat box and other things. If you're watching this in YouTube later, everything we're going to talk about is down. Click on the show more on the description box down there below in the YouTube video, and all of those links and all of the connections will all be there as well. So keep that in mind. Okay, so part of this presentation, Matt's going to take. I'll click through the slides, but Matt's going to talk about just some basic functionality of it. We're not going to spend a ton of time on these; they're really for later use. But Matt, talk about what we're taking a look at here.
Yeah, so I wanted to start out, and this goes to one of the comments we saw: is what is a scatter plot? What's an XY? And it's to graph two measures, two variables that we're monitoring against each other. So the one that the most people kind of know about is the friction circle. So we can graph the longitudinal, the front to back G forces versus the left to right G forces. And then we can see how much of the grip of the tire we used. And we're going to go through how to make this. I'm going to put it in a profile so you can have it. And we'll also see how we can make it look just like this. And this is the one I think most drivers really like to see. It can tell us so much about how we're driving, and it really helps us to see kind of the car handling and a bunch of things. So it's a neat one to dive into, and kind of one of the most basic, but we'll see a lot of ways we can use it.
Perfect. Here's the second one.
And then I wanted to give us just a quick overview, and we're going to do these real time as we're looking at everything. There's kind of 3 ways that we have to look at the settings for scatter plots. The first one, as Roger pointed out, was we can click the wrench, or we can right click and say settings. And that brings us to what we're looking at here, where we can work on our the labels for the axis. We can add that circular grid that we saw. We can name it. We can change the line and the dot size. And we can choose if we want to show it. So that's the right click or the wrench. And then the other spots that I thought might be sort of gotchas as people work this so that they remember how to do it, is I started on the next slide, is in the measures setting. So that's in our channel list, and we're going to do these real time, is where you go in. This one, we're looking at GPS lateral acceleration, and we can pick the scale of it. So we can pick how much of the range it actually shows us. And then we're going to be able to pick that step size, which is the grid lines that we're looking at. And this is for whatever's on the X and the Y. And then the other spot that shows up, and we'll see how this works as well, is in the coloring of those dots or the lines. Is we set that in the measures because it's related to that measure. So these are the 2 things that I thought maybe will trip people up. So I wanted to kind of highlight it and give you the slide so you can go back and look at it if you have some trouble with it later.
Again, this is a presentation that is available for you. Those of you listening live can go ahead and download this and just to keep these slides, keep some of these things straight. If you're watching later, the presentation will be linked down below.
Mm-hmm.
Perfect. I don't think there was another slide, right?
This was it.
The next slide was. I try to do these things so I don't have to worry about going too far. Live demonstration. So the next thing we're going to do is we're going to just jump into some live data, and the other thing we're going to do today while we're doing that, we're going to take a look at your questions, and we're going to try to maybe group those towards the end. So if you have a question, if we see it and it fits directly where we're talking, we'll probably throw it in and talk about it. But if not, we've tried to leave a little time at the end to answer questions as well. So keep that in mind, that if you're here live watching and you throw a question up and we're not covering it, we're doing maybe a little bit differently today than we normally do. So let me bring up Race Studio 3. Boom. Matt's going to run at his place, but let's talk a little bit about. I just wanted to go over here as Matt's getting his ready to go. That this is Race Studio 3, and what we're talking about today is the scatter plot as we chatted about. And what I've done here is I have opened up a scatter plot that has never had any user profile attached to it. And we wanted to do that so those of you that are watching this later and you're brand new at this and you haven't played around at all, this is what it will look like when you start up. There's no user profile showing. You see up here it says analysis 001, so it's got this default blank user profile. And so Matt's going to have that as well. Some of the stuff we talked about briefly. Here is the line width and the dot size, and over here is the color and the x-axis. We talked about those icons, and then of course the lapse button and the settings, and where we can just jump in and see the settings that Matt talked about. Matt will go into those in detail in just a moment. So that's what Race Studio 3 looks like when you first open up a scatter plot. I'm going to stop my share, Matt, so you be ready to share your screen. And oops, I think I stopped it, didn't I?
Yep, here we go.
There we go.
And we're in.
Matt should show it. There it just popped up. And so Matt is now going to show us his Race Studio 3 and just start walking through some of the different things that we were going to talk about. We're going to show how to build some. We're going to run a couple of worked examples. And I think let the cat out of the bag a little bit. GSum, a gear ratio functionality, and some tire temps. Those are what we're going to work on setting up and showing you how to do them, and we're going to save user profiles between all three of those and make those available later in the YouTube video. Okay? And by the way, for everybody that's watching here, the sample data is in the chat box live of this data that we're looking at, and it'll be available for you in the YouTube video as well. It's the sample data. So, Matt, go ahead.
All right. So what I did here is the same thing Roger did. Is if you have a data set and you come in and you click your scatter plot layout, this is what's going to pop up. And this is one of the ones we're going to get into second, because sometimes I think it's a little harder to understand than the friction circle. And we have all these buttons that we talked about. So the standard buttons that go through all of Race Studio, we have our line width that we can set it to a different width if we want it. We have our dot size that we can change. And one of the neat tricks that you're going to hear me use a couple different times today that I really like is if you hold the control key and click these buttons, it brings it to the default. So when we do the line button, it sets the line to 0. Or if we do the dot button, it sets it to 5. I think that's a pretty handy feature to make these changes really quick. It's something that I didn't use those hotkeys a lot. I've started to use them. So something to remember in there. The other major settings that we have that Roger had mentioned is we can choose the line graph over here, and this sets our X, our left to right axis. Remember, X is always our left to right. And we can choose the paint can, and that lets us pick how we want to color this, if we want to color these dots. And then we have one of my favorite buttons, laps. We can pick all the laps, our best lap, best 3 or best 5. And then we have our settings, and the settings is one of the ones that we have 2 ways to pick this. Is we can click the button, and that brings up all of our settings. The way I usually think to do it anymore is I'm a right clicker, so I can right click and then choose settings, and it pops up the settings for this plot. When we get in here, we can change the name of this panel. And then we have another way to set our line width and our dot sizes, our cursor size. We can choose the channel tags, which is the names up here. We can put the label on our axis so we can see what that measure really is on our Y and our X. We can add our grid. We can allow different channels and different panels. And that's something we're going to use in our last example, because I always consider that a little bit more of the advanced function, how everything goes. And then we can choose if we want to hide it when the spacebar gets pressed, which for me, in the way I interact with Race Studio 3, it's not something I would normally use with the scatter plot, but maybe in your way, it's something to keep in mind and how you like to use it. So if we start and we say, well, we open up the data, and this data, for anyone that's watching this on YouTube, is down in the comments, is you can download this data file and do this follow along and do it on your own if you don't have your own data. When we open this up, we say, well, we want this friction circle. So the friction circle starts with our lateral acceleration and our longitudinal. So if we set our x-axis first, instead of having GPS speed, we can click to choose our X here and type in GPS. And I interact with the search bar all the time. I don't sort my channels anymore. I always just type in. I think, Roger, when you use the software, you still sort some things, right?
I do. It's an old habit. I think I'm slowly breaking free of it, but I still like to see things in certain orders.
So here I type in GPS long. I got my GPS longitudinal acceleration, and it changes. And now we have a pretty messed up looking graph because it's G forces on our left to right versus RPM. And we say, well, that could be neat and that could be something to look at, but not what we want right now.
I think you picked longitudinal across the bottom, and I think you wanted lateral.
You are right.
So we get to see it twice.
Well, here's another way you can do this is you can right click on it and you can say choose our X axis. So not only do we have our line graph here, we can choose X here. And then in this, we want lateral. It's going to do the same mistake again. So here we go, lateral. And now we have RPM versus lateral acceleration. Kind of a neat graph.
Yeah, kind of actually a little bit interesting, and you're halfway there, but it's this is where, as Matt is getting ready to change that, I think of XY plots as is just two channels comparing against each other during in time and distance, right? We're going to show you these ones that Matt showed up, but I have found neat little things all through my data career just by opening up XY plots and just picking different channels to do at different times. While I would think you would not want to do something like this, it actually is a little interesting that look how much of the time RPM is spent over in the right-hand side of the graph. It's Lime Rock, and we probably would have been there, but it's interesting. Just a little bit one long corner, it looks like, where you're spending some time at RPM. So anyway, go ahead, Matt.
Right, and it's a good point. I completely agree that so many times I have found really great correlations because it's one thing versus the other by accident. You type in the wrong thing. This one, I look at this really quick and I go, well, geez, if my car redline's about 7,000 RPM, and we see this line is about 6,000. So whatever corner is right here, we say, well, geez, maybe the gearing's not right. Maybe we could do something there. Maybe as a driver, I need to be in a different gear.
Yeah.
Really neat feature of Race Studio 3 analysis is, and just like Race Studio 2 analysis, is the point you click is dynamically linked to the map. So down here, we can zoom in and see that corner and see right where it is. And that's the downhill at Lime Rock onto the front straight.
Yeah, Kyle mentioned in the chat that he likes to have a map, and as part of this, just for this very reason, Matt showed it, and that is the reason why the default view has a strip chart and be able to use selects with the storyboard and a track map to
Hmm.
make this even by default. It already adds that map for you because I agree with Kyle. It is a very valuable tool.
Yeah. So when you make mistakes, it always gives you this chance. Like maybe it's
Exactly.
really not a mistake. Maybe it's
Exactly.
something you can learn something from.
Very cool.
So now to continue on, and we want to put our longitudinal acceleration in here. It's our y-axis, and the way we set that is through the channels that we pick. So what I'm going to do here is turn off RPM, and now we don't have anything there. And I go back and I put in the search bar LON. We can get GPS longitudinal acceleration, and now we have this graph. So this is the friction circle that we look at, but it's a little devoid. It's not giving us, I think, as much as maybe we want to plot with it. So as we start to jump in here, I'm going to say, well, let's add that circular grid that we saw in the example, because I think that adds a lot. So again, we can do our wrench, or we can right click and say settings, and then we can say use the circular grid. So now we have a circle behind it. And one of the things to remember is the scale of the axis is variable, and we can change it. So right now we see this isn't quite a perfect circle. So we have a couple ways we can change this. Is we can go into one of these measures and open up longitudinal acceleration. Here's one of my other tricks I'm going to show you is we can do it through, or I'm sorry, lateral acceleration. We can do it through this gear icon right here and pick our scale. We can double click this axis and it will auto scale, which it does automatically when you open it, or we can control double click it and pull this scale up. So 3 ways to get to change the scaling. And what I'm going to do here to try to make it a little more square is I'm going to say, let's change this to -2 to 2. And we see now we have a pretty good circle.
And it the data was all correct numerically before,
Yeah,
but it give you the visual in a GSum is as important as the having the correct values, right? Because we're really looking at this graph and going, how is he moving from full braking G's into cornering G's, and staying at the limit of the tire adhesion, right? So it's visibly, I think it's important to do what you've just done because it does help help you get the data out of it.
certainly. And another way we can change these axes as well is say we want to change it again. We can double click and it zooms in and we lose our nice round circles. We can also use our scrolling functions, and whether it's you have a pinch on a mouse pad or you have a mouse wheel, when you are over the axis, you can zoom in and out. So right now I'm using my mouse wheel. You can see I'm right over the 0 point on our lateral acceleration, our X axis, and I can zoom out till we get those nice circles. And I can do the same thing on the Y if we want that.
Yep, very cool.
What I also think is a neat power with these zooming functions is we can also zoom in on the graph. If we hold our mouse over a point, it zooms into a specific point. So one of the questions we had was, what are these odd points out here?
Yep.
So we can look at them, right? And we can click on it and we see in our mouse, it is, or on our map, it's a corner called the uphill, and it's up at the top of the hill. We can zoom in there and see. It doesn't really look like it's a curbstone or anything. There's not something there, but it's got a lot of elevation change. So we get a lot of grip. So I think that's what we see there, but we can really zoom in and see the points that are in there. Raj and I were discussing the other day about looking at scatter plots. One of the things that, or a feature of using this that we really like too, was our ability to add some of these lines to it. So we can add a small line and zoom back into our point and then see the progression of kind of how they go.
Ties
So I
them
think
together a little bit better.
yeah, this adds a whole bunch more power to what we're looking at. And then when we want to go back, we can use these zoom features again, and we can double click our axis and it brings us right back. And we can change our zoom level a little bit to get our round circles again.
And then
So,
the other option that we've used a lot in the past, we've talked a few times about, is here we've got a gray XY plot, right? And there's a lot of power in here. We'll actually talk about maybe some areas of opportunity to do a little bit of analyzing on this in a moment. But we have the option of giving it a third dimension or a third channel applying to it. Why don't you walk through some of that?
yeah, so that was where I was going. We have this graph and it tells us a whole bunch, but now we want to add a third channel. So we can go in and click our paint bucket, and this gives us a chance to pick a color channel. So what's the color channel? So maybe we want to look at this and say brake pressure, it's on the top, and we say, well, how does our use of the brake pedal with our G forces work out? So we can pick brake pressure, say okay, and then now we have this really great colored graph. And when we look at this, the blue is from the least amount of brake pressure, which makes sense here, because when we are over the 0 point to positive values in longitudinal G-forces, we have acceleration. And when we have our biggest negative values, we are slowing the most. So that's the most brake pressure that we see. So it makes sense our red would be way down here. And then as it comes across as the releasing as it goes towards blue of that brake pressure. So now we have this graph that has a lot of power to it, and we can see not only what the G forces are, but we also see the transition out of the brake on it.
It's interesting you picked brake pressure. That we had a whole series of driver coaches and how they use data that we had about a year or so ago, and I was always amazed since I started talking a lot with driver coaches was what's some of the most important stuff you work with? What's the most important part of a corner? And they didn't talk about turn in, and they didn't talk about throttle on. It was always about brake application and brake, coming off the brakes. And by colorizing it with brakes, you get a visual of how you're doing that. A lot of people use throttle here, but brake is a great way of looking at this as well.
Yeah, I always think of the driver input. So when we're working with G-forces, it's really the balance of the car and how the driver's balancing the contact patches.
Yep.
So the first one that popped up was brake, but I also use throttle position here a lot. So we can
very, very quickly can just change it very quickly.
Pop up throttle position, we change it, and we see, again, somewhat what we expect is that accelerating. We have the red, which is the highest values, and then we have blue under braking, and through, and we can go and investigate all these points and see how they interrelate. The other one that I would think here too is we can very quickly say steering and see if there's anything in there.
One jumped right out at me, right over in the left quadrant, way up top. There you go. There's a colorized dot change, right?
Right.
Color dot change. Well, you wonder what happened there.
Right. So this gives us the tools that then we can go, okay, well, we want to have a deeper dive, and we can start zooming into these points.
You would click on that point. You would see where it happened on the lap, and blah, blah, blah. Yep. There you go.
And then with our other graphs, we can keep adding and building in. And that was in some of the previous webinars, we did that, is looking at profiles and how to dig into all these things. Is where does this really lead us, and what does this tell us about what the car's doing and the driver's doing and everything else.
Perfect. So you've created a really cool one here. Maybe we leave it at the steering. Why don't we save a profile? Let's go through that real quickly. We're going to save these profiles. We want to share them with everybody later. So maybe create a user profile saved from this GSum.
Yeah. So I tell people this all the time. So now we made this GSum. We made this great graph of the friction circle, and we say this is something we really like. So how do we get back to this? Because maybe you're not a power user yet. You're learning how to do all this. Is we save it as a profile. And to save it as a profile, we go our top left, and there's this gear. And even when we hover over, it says change analysis profile settings. So when we click that, it gives us the option to save our profile. So I want to save the profile as, and I'm going to call this webinar friction circle scatter. And when we hit return, we see it saves it. And up on our tab now, we see what profile we're in. So we're going to share this with everybody. I'll get it to Roger after the webinar. He's going to stick it down in the comments. And then if this is something that helps you out, you can download it. You can start to change it. You can, if you put it with my data, it will give you all these options that we had with the steering and the brake and everything else. And if you only have a solo 2 and all you have is these G-forces, it'll give you the same graph. So it's a really powerful profile and way to look at your data that I think will help a lot of people.
Perfect.
So the next one, I kind of had 3 setups that I wanted to show everybody on how to go through these. So the second one I wanted to show you is a gearing chart, because if you have a race car and maybe it's a Formula Ford or something, and you get to change the gears, or maybe it's a car with a drop gear in the rear end, you get to change it, or you're just looking at your car and you're saying, hey, I want to change gearing. And this is something I'm going to have to do because adding some power to my car, I top out at like 130 and I can hit that with my old amount of horsepower. So when I add some, maybe I need some more gear, maybe these splits are going to change. So we've got this profile. We say, well, we want to go back and we want to look at the gear. So how do we do that? And when we start to build that, we have to change our axis again. So we can go in, and whether we want to right click and say choose our x-axis, or we can do it up here. Again, I kind of think to right click a lot of times, and we can pick our speed. So I start to go in and I say GPS speed. So now again, we end up with these graphs and we go, well, geez, maybe there's something here to come back and check out in the future, or we just kind of keep moving. So I'm going to go in, I'm going to turn off my lateral acceleration, and automatically it popped up with RPM, which is actually what we want. So now what we have is we have this graph that shows RPM going up and down versus speed left to right. But I look at this and I go, geez, there's no kind of tick lines on it. It's a little bit hard to read. So how do we clean this up a little bit? Well, we can go in and do it 2 ways. Is we can click our gear next to the measure that we want. So I'm going to start with RPM, and I'm going to go in and say, set the step on our scaling. And this should bring in our line. And this caught me the other day. This is advanced feature, is because we started with our old profile and some of these settings are in here. So if we go in and we look at our settings for our graph, we still have this circular grid on, but the circular grid doesn't make sense for this sort of graph. So we have to turn it off. And when we turn that off, now we can see our axis lines behind it. And it makes a lot more sense. We have tick marks going up from 60, 70, 80, and we have it across from the RPM ranges. And just like before, we can go in and zoom these in if we want them. And another neat feature when we do this is we start to lose some information off the bottom. Well, we can click and drag these up and down.
No control, no shift, no nothing. Just click and hold, left mouse button.
Just, yep. Okay. Just click and hold, and it works left to right as well.
There you go.
So pretty powerful ways to interact with the software and start building these graphs that we want. When I look at this one, is I say, well, then, geez, if we have RPM, maybe we want to color this by throttle position. So we can right click and go through the settings and say to reset the color channel, and it brings it back to just by the lap. Or we can go and say, choose our color channel and pick throttle. And when we do that, we can see that as the RPMs go up, it's dark red for the most throttle position. And then it's blue on the, when there's no throttle position, 0 throttle, and how it goes.
And sometimes you may have the clutch in at that point, and that's why you've got some oddness to it. You talked about reasons of using this earlier, and you know, there's what maybe 25-40% of the people out there have the ability or desire to change gear ratios. So they're thinking to themselves, well, this graph doesn't do me a lot of good. But the one way that I have used this in the past quite a bit is looking for clutch slip. And any deviation while on throttle is either tire spin, and you can see that right in the middle of your graph, about 80 miles an hour on that middle one. You can see the red goes up. That's probably tire spin. And if you get some sort of a hook at some point, it might even be RPM is going up and the wheel speed does not. It could be clutch slip. So there's other ways of using the same exact data.
Really great point, Roger, because this one, as we investigate this a little bit and we look here, is this, we see this point that Roger talked about, right? And we can zoom in and go, geez, that it picked up
a bunch of
these
RPM.
are 500 ticks, so maybe 400 or 500 RPM, and we can go to our map, right? And we look at it and we say, well, that's the top of the hill. So as the car comes over the hill and the back gets a little bit light, it does spin the wheels a little bit.
And because it's GPS speed across the bottom, it's not hooked to a rear wheel speed. The
right.
tires didn't spin up. The car didn't go faster and slower, but the RPM did. Boom, you've got an outlier. It should catch your eye, and you should figure it out.
Yeah. And
perfect.
And you can go in and look and investigate. You know, we could change our time speed or our time distance graph to have elevation or slope and look at all those things.
I see one more about halfway up that one that's not as the one in the middle. There's some red dots there. Is that in a corner? I do not know. Right? There's something
you can zoom out, and that's on the way down the hill.
Yeah, maybe there's a differential that's letting the inside tire spin a little bit or something right there.
Right, and it also one is, as you start to dig deeper, is I'd look at it and go, well, that's kind of a busy spot on the track, and you're getting ready for things. Maybe the driver's doing something.
Yeah.
Like I'd look at it and say, maybe it's actually like I'm bracing myself and I'm bumping the clutch or something.
Matt being an experienced data guy, it's not immediately that there's a plus or a negative to this. It's just there's something happening. Figure it out. Is it car? Is it driver? Is it what is it? And then look for a resolution. So very cool.
I just dig in and I just kind of go, well, what's happening? And then I try to evaluate, well, is it good or is it bad? Is there something different? Same thing with these little ones here.
There you go.
Is I look at that and it's coming onto the back straight, and these ones, I would guess there's a curve in there that sometimes you hit.
There you go.
Neat feature that you can do is when we use our buttons, we can pick our best 5 laps and say, well, look at this. These are repeatable. Yeah.
There you go. Very cool.
So yeah, as you look at it, it gives you some different ways to look at these things and see what's going on. So as we're looking at gearing and everything, and we want to say, well, let's make this really great gear map out of this. One of the things I would do to make it powerful for me and the way I use the software is I'd start removing some of these other windows. And this is something we've talked about in the profiles and we've mentioned in some of the webinars, is we can right click on a panel and choose to remove that panel. And I don't like the storyboard in general. It's not kind of how I think about using the software. So I'd remove those two and I'd just make this big graph. And to me, if I was looking at gearing, and this is something I wanted to dig into, this now becomes a really powerful way for me to look at it.
The focus point now, much bigger.
Yeah, and a tiny bit off topic, but I want to throw this in here for you as well, is we have a gear calculation and we can set those in our map. So if I want to color our map now and say this is by gear, now I have a gear chart here and a track map with what gear the car was in. And I look at this and I go, geez, now not only do I know what's going on, I can see where it is and I can see what gear it's in. To me, this becomes so powerful in how I use it. I go, this is something I want to save, right? So we're going to save it again. We're going to go up to our profile and say, save the profile as, I'm going to call it webinar gear scatter. And then again, we're going to share this. If you've got a system that has RPM in it, along with the GPS speed that everybody has, now all of a sudden we have even another really powerful way to use your system.
Perfect.
So one of the questions that Kyle had was, how do we go about putting all different graphs up that have different x-axis or just different information in them, and how do we display that in a way? And I want to jump into that because it's something I really like doing, and it relates to some data that I've used a lot with tire pressures. And I say, well, geez, if I want to have a tire pressure graph, and I say I want to look at lateral G-forces versus tire pressure and see what tire pressures make more G-forces. But to do that, I need 4 graphs because I have 4 tires. So when I start to think about that, I start saying, well, geez, I need to have, not only do I need different information in different panels, I need to have 4 scatters. So how do I do that? We have one up now, right? So any graph we start in, we can right click, and then we can say add a window, and I want to add one to the right. So now I've got 2, and I can use our dividing bar and kind of space it. And then I go, well, now I want some underneath. So I kind of have 4 quadrants. So I can say add a window bottom and do the same thing here. And when I do these, wrong button, I can add a window to the bottom. And now I have my 4 graphs, right? And we can move.
You have 4 placeholders, right? Now you can,
right.
And one of them's an XY plot. You could do anything in the other 3.
Right. So now we have to choose what kind of function we want to put in. So here we're really focused on these scatter plots. So I'm going to pick a scatter plot, and I'm going to choose a scatter plot, and I'm going to choose a scatter plot. And we go, all we have now is 4 of the same thing. This doesn't really help us. So what we're going to do is go in and say to our settings and say that we want to allow different channels and different panels. And I did it by right clicking here. Another way we can do it is go through and do it with
there you see your four different scatter graphs.
Use
were
our ridge.
all there.
Yeah. So we can go in here and do it for each one.
And the way that the software works is it adds an additional scatter plot. It adds the little chevrons, and you can actually go in and rename those left front, right front if you want to, or you can leave those.
And I'm going to do that quickly because this is one of the ones where when I started to do it, I said, well, geez, where's the 2 chevron versus the 3 chevron? I said, well, the naming convention becomes pretty important here. So I'm going to pick my top left, and I'm going to say settings. I'm going to call this one LF for left front. And I'm going to do it for each corner. So I'm going to set our second one, right front. Our third one, settings, left rear. In our last one,
while Matt is doing this, we went from a GSum, which is a really basic XY plot, to the gear ratio, which is maybe a medium use of it, and now we're getting into a kind of a cool little advanced plot. But what you're going to find is it's all the same exact thing with just a few more steps, right, to add the complexity.
Yep, and you can do this in 2 ways. Is you can go through and set up each graph as the components of it, or you can make one finished. So the way I think is I look at it and go, well, for all of them, I want lateral acceleration across the bottom. So I'm going to go put that in each one. GPS lateral acceleration. And I like using my button. So I'll go up here, I click the button because I find that's the fastest way for me to interact.
And knowing that you're in the right box.
Right.
Yeah.
This is the one too that also helps, that if you pick the wrong box, they're all going to be the same. And it helps a little bit. So now we still don't have a graph we want, right? What we have to do now is, because we have different information in different channels, we can go in here and now pick, I know my channel name was TPMS. So our pressure left front, when we have the ability to set different channels and different panels, it's chosen with a right click. So if I right click on this channel name, I get the option to show it. And this is where changing those the panel names becomes important, because now I know I'm on my left front and I want to show it in our left front graph. And here's some data. And I can do this for each one. So, I'm sorry. Go here and say right front, show in, right front, left rear, show in, left rear, right rear, show in, right rear. Now I have 4 graphs
With data, populated with
with
data.
some data. So I look at these, I go, well, one lap doesn't really help me that much. So maybe I want to turn on all my laps. And I go, well, geez, there's data going off. So I can double click my y-axis and load all this data in. So now I've got some pretty powerful data sets, and I can see a lot of data here.
And your
But I don't like
colorized, your third colorized channel is what at this point?
we don't know. So that's one that we can right click and say, well, this I should. So that's a great point, Roger. As we look at this and we start building really powerful graphs, we don't know what this one's colorized by, because the other ones, when we see an empty paint can, they're colorized by lap.
There you go.
This one, when we have the rainbow in it, we don't remember what it's done, and maybe we don't care about that right now. So we can just say, we can right click on our graph and say reset color channel, and now they all match for laps. I look at this and I go, well, this is pretty cool data, but these measures here, this stuff is kind of bugging me because it's blocking some of the data I want to look at. So we can right click and go into our settings, and we can turn off the channel tag. And because I right clicked, it's only going to give me the option for one. So this is when I like to go to our settings wrench. And now I have all my stuff up here. So I can go left front, we just did, left rear, turn it off, right front, turn it off, right rear, turn it off, say okay. And now we've got a pretty powerful graph because we have our tire pressure, we have labels on it, we have our lateral acceleration with the label on it, and we have each tire. So now I look at this and I go, man, this is pretty powerful stuff. And we can also go in here, and I'm going to turn off my search bar, shrink my map a little bit. And if we look at laps, if we really wanted to go through, we can see the progression through the colors as we go, because I have all the laps turned on. And if you go back and you say, well, what was my tire pressure on the best lap? We can pick the button and we can do it for 3 laps.
See where that pressure was for your best.
5 laps, yeah.
Go back to all laps for just a second. Before we jump out of that totally, look at this, the quick data scan, right? It looks like a funnel, right? Mm-hmm. And what it's telling me is, generally speaking, the more tire pressure you were getting, the more of the GPS lateral G's you were achieving. Yeah. So ironically, you never. I don't know how many laps this was. It was a lot, right? You never quite achieved. I don't think. Maybe maybe it was coming down in no, it would always be increasing in tire pressure. So as it was coming up, you were getting higher and higher G's. So yeah, maybe you needed to start with a couple pounds more. Who knows?
Right, and a good observation is we see in our laps list, when we click our laps button, it gives us our the lap number, and it highlights our best one. Yeah. And the best lap was actually the last lap.
Yeah, and it could be any number of things, but if you were really working on tire pressures, you would you certainly file that away in your list of things to do for the next session, right?
Right, and because it's my data and I get to play the driver bingo, that I get to win it, is I'd go, well, there was a lot of traffic, right? It helped me up. I couldn't get any better.
There you go.
So
interesting.
Again, we made this really great graph. And I go, geez, I want to use this again. Like this is something I come back and I use it, tracks all over. I use it all the time. So I'm going to go in and I'm going to save this again. So we're going to go File, Save Profile As. And I'm going to call this Webinar TPMS Data. Say OK. And then now we see that we've saved this. The power of profiles. So if you haven't used them, what's really neat is we go, well, this is interesting. And maybe you say, but I don't have a TPMS system. I want to look at my friction circle. Well, when we go back, we can load that profile back and pull up our friction circle. And here we go. Oh.
it just
we
went
go
to
to
the
our
time
scatter
distance plot.
plot.
Yeah.
Yep. And a great example is we have all our laps on. We can go back and turn it to our single lap. Oh, I clicked best lap again. And there we have it. So now you're back to the view that you wanted to have. So a very simple way to move throughout. And if you mess up your graphs, if you do everything else, you can always get back to where you were.
Kyle asked the question in the chat. But does driving harder increase pressure, or does increased pressure allow harder driving? Data analysis, right? There's a deeper question there, but it is kind of humorous.
Right.
But what's really cool about it is you've just created. We've chatted through all of the options. There are a bunch of options that are available in Scatter. There's not as many as what you might think. You went through them all. You recreated a couple of screens that either took away the time measure graph or the storyboard in a couple of yours. You created 3 scatter plots while we've just been chatting here for about the last 30 minutes or so. You've saved them out as profiles. We're again, as we're getting ready to maybe close this one up a little bit, you have the option when we get done with this, those of you watching us later on YouTube, to download this sample data and download these user profiles and import those into your machine and play with these a little bit if you want, or just follow along and build them with your own data and save them. You have some different options of learning the X, Y, or the scatter plot. So perfect. Matt? Is there anything else you'd like to add as we're talking about that part, or did you see any questions that came up that we might want to kind of transition to?
No, I think we kind of hit all the big points for everybody. And if they have any more questions, obviously they can always email into you, Roger. They can email into me, and we can work through it and see. But I think we got all the big features that go along with how to use the scatter plots and how it puts things together.
Perfect. I think a great example too, by the way. 3 great examples at different levels of use cases, right? The GSum being something that everybody likes to have and everybody uses, and all of our devices with a GPS sensor can create the gear ratio and then the tire temps. So I think you did a great job. Okay, go ahead, Matt.
I was seeing really quick, because Kyle's question is, I answered in my mind and it didn't come out the same way. So if we're going to pull up the tire pressure profile again, and when we look at this, we look at our scatter, and just so we have a better data set, I'm going to turn on all our laps again. So we look at this, and Kyle said, well, what if I want different X-axis across these different data sets? And it was something using the software all the time, it was obvious to me, but it's really not obvious, is that when we look, we have the same X-axis because that's how I built this. But if you want to change this from, say, lateral acceleration to brake pressure, we can say brake pressure. So now we have lateral acceleration on the X in some, and a different one, brake pressure, in this one. And we can go through and choose through either right clicking and saying choose a channel for the X, or our button. We can pick anything that we want and say maybe a really quick, maybe a neat example here is we have, let's put this back to lateral G. And I have a brake temperature sensor on my left front. So maybe we want to say, well, we always hear these things about brakes and how much they heat up the tire. So here's a correlation example, and we can have rotor temp to tire pressure and say, does this really make a difference on a 914? And here I'd kind of look at it and say, well, no, because as the pressure goes up, the temperature is not changing a lot. But again, this is where you have all these great ways to show your data, and you can choose how you want to dig in and how you want to display it.
I think what Kyle's question was perfect, because in some of our functionality, not scatter, but some of the other ones, it's hard to bring up these multiple graphs so you're in one panel, right? The scatter plot allows us to bring up these multiple scatter plots. That makes the x-axis able to be changed, where in some of the other ones you bring up just a single time distance plot, and you can't. It's a little harder to change the x-axis
Yep.
for different channels and see that it changes it for everything, right? So
Right.
perfect question, perfect answer. I'm glad you got back to it. I did see his chat in his post into the chat box as well. So perfect, Matt. Anything else you'd like to add before we stop sharing yours and jump back?
No, I think I will give you control back,
Okay, let's do
and we
that.
we
And,
hit
and
all the big items that I wanted.
and I will share my screen. Let's get you out of there. What I wanted to open up back with is the oops, did it not take? Let me try it again. Screen one. There we go. There, boom, there it is. Oh, another thing I'd like to add with Matt, if you would just check out those questions a little bit real quickly,
Sure.
and I will let's talk about a document that we have a user guide. It's the Ray Studio 3 beta user guide, and there is some updates that need to be made to it. But what I've been doing for each of these functions is snipping out the scatter layout in this case, the channels report piece in the one before, grabbing the scatter layout information from that user guide and giving you a link to both the full user guide and the chapter alone. And this is a picture of that. It's only a couple pages that it talks about the scatter, but it does talk about what the default one looks like and some of the different ways of using it and what some of the terms are. So that's available to you. We'll have it linked here in the chat box and of course in the description box for those of you watching it in YouTube later. So this PDF will be available for you right now and later. Okay. Perfect. Let's before we jump out of here, Matt, was there any questions that you thought you might want to answer before we kind of close this out?
There was one I typed the answer, but one of the questions was, if you have a scatter plot, can you kind of play through the track
Okay.
and see how the points move? Absolutely. You can't hit a play button, but absolutely you can see the progression. And it's one that if you click in the time distance graph and you drag your cursor point along, you'll see the cursor point in the scatter plot move along with it to the corresponding values.
And I think I have one here just to show that. Back to some live data. I'm down here in the one of the reasons maybe to leave this time distance bar across the bottom here is I'm just holding my left mouse button down and look at the X jumping around up in the XY plot. You can see it going up. There was a shift for him, and then there he is going up the straightaway, and there's a shift and back down. So yes, we've actually been chatting with it with the software team. Ray Studio 2 had an icon up here in the toolbar that you could push, and it would just go real time and just scroll across. I think that's on the functions list that they're talking about. It's just not there yet. So manually come down into here and just drag back in. Option here is you can go backwards and find your exact spot. If you're really worried about that one, you would want to click near it, and now you get that exact spot, and you can just go back and forth and understand exactly why that's moving at that spot. So, okay, perfect.
So, Roger, another great way to do that you and I didn't think of, and I didn't add, and I should have added today, was if you add another panel with the video, and you play the video, it draws you right through it.
Yeah, there you go. Shoot. Yeah, we're out of time, or I would quickly add that. But there you go. There you go.
Right.
Perfect. Let's bring up Ray Studio 3 back up because we're right here at the end. But that is a great tip. Perfect. Lots of great questions today. I appreciate it. All of these, just like we've always done, all of these are being recorded. We will take the time as soon as I get done. I go to work on this. It takes a couple of hours by the time they upload and writing the descriptions and all that stuff. It will be up on YouTube. I know we're doing these in the middle of the day here in North America, and so we have a lot of people that would love to come and watch it live, but they're working or otherwise occupied, so they watch them as soon as they get home at the end of the day. So they'll be up here. We've got over 200 videos up here, all 138 of our webinars plus a bunch of other videos as well. Take a look, travel around, search around on our YouTube page. Just tons and tons of information there. Customer support, we're in that season, right? The spring is here. We've got a lot of race events happening. Our guys, our technicians are out at racetracks every weekend. and look for us in the Sprinter vans or walking around in our backpacks, and grab the guy and chat with him. Lots of great information there and lots of customer support for you. If you don't see us at the track and you need to get a hold of us, there's an 800 number there. Give us a call. Love to help you. Get the most bang for the buck out of your data, hardware and software. That's what we're really here for. The next week, I talked about it a little bit earlier, but the best use of the track function is next week. We're in the middle of a period here where we're going through function to function, and the track function is next. And Emiliano from AIM is going to join us to do this one. This one, when I first saw it, as I think I mentioned earlier, I thought it was just okay, just a track map and a little bit of information, but this actually is a little bit of a specialized function, and there's some pretty cool stuff that it does. I think this one here, of all of them, will be a bit of an introduction to a lot of people that haven't used this function yet. So of even the older time users, and let alone the folks that are just getting into Ray Studio 3. So look forward to seeing everybody here next Tuesday, and Emiliano working with us and learning the track function. I think you'll enjoy it. So make sure you join us next week. This slide again, since the software went to production, starting on March 1st, we have been creating these webinars that are covering some of the tasks you might want to do, personalizing Ray Studio 3, moving from beta to production, and so forth, and being very, very focused on using or the individual functionality of Ray Studio 3. We're in the middle of it. Today is the scatter function. Down in the YouTube description of the one that you're watching here, if you're watching this later, I've gone back and every time we put up a new one of this series, I go back and I edit the description box inside of the YouTube, and I add the link to all of the ones that are finished so far. So anytime you go into any of these, you'll have the ability to jump straight to another function inside of Ray Studio 3 and learn about that one as well. The upcoming ones, the track function I just mentioned, split times is going to be on the 26th. The histogram function on May 3rd, and May 10th, we're going to go back and tie it all together with that opening database function, and kind of tie all these things together. So looking forward to that. A lot of people like to know what the upcoming schedule is a little bit more, and we're able to solidify and get this solid. So I'm able to share this. So there you go. Start planning around what's coming. Contact information. We've gone through some pretty good information. Matt has shared just some great stuff. There's Matt's information, contact information. Mine is on the left. Look forward to hearing from you. If you have any questions, anything you might want or need, make sure you get a hold of us. Very much appreciate it. You got everybody joining us. Matt, anything you'd like to kind of add as we close this one down?
No, I had a lot of fun, and I'm already, as you were talking and I was kind of reading some of the comments, I've already got more ideas going for how I'm going to use scatter plots, and I can't wait to talk about the track function and see all that, because every time I get in there, I just keep learning more and more about it.
Exactly, and as all the panels as well. I open up another function and I learn something new. Just the one we talked about earlier, how to animate that. Do we really need an animate button with the video function? Hit the play button. There you go. I hadn't thought about that one. So very good for all the people here that help us along doing what we do. Thanks everyone for being here. I appreciate it. Looking forward to seeing everybody next Tuesday. We're gonna have a great time again as usual. So we'll stop it there, and we will see you guys all next week. Talk to you soon.